I swear that morning started like any other boring Tuesday of my life. I was still in my pajamas, hair in a messy bun, staring at the empty fridge and mentally cursing myself for not going to the market the day before. My car was practically running on fumes, so I grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door without even thinking twice. That's how normal it felt back then, using his car, trusting his words, moving through the house like we were on the same team. I remember humming some random song, slipping on my sandals, and locking the door behind me as if my whole life wasn't about to split in half. When I opened the car door, the first thing that hit me was the faint smell of his cologne mixed with old coffee. It felt familiar, almost comforting. I tossed my bag onto the passenger seat and bent down to adjust the floor mat, because it was folded under the pedal again. That's when I saw it, a small crumpled piece of paper sticking out from under the seat. At first I thought it was just a receipt or some random trash he'd forgotten to throw away. I picked it up with that lazy, absent-minded attitude, already planning the grocery list in my head, completely unaware that this tiny piece of paper was about to set my whole world on fire. It was a parking ticket. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just a simple printed slip with a date, a time, and an address. I almost threw it into the little compartment, but something made my eyes run over the date. I froze. It was a holiday. A day he'd sworn the office needed him, that there was some urgent project that couldn't wait until after the long weekend. I remember that day so clearly because I'd actually felt guilty for being upset. He'd told me he was under so much pressure that I wasn't being fair when I questioned why he couldn't spend that one day with me. He said I needed to understand how serious his career was for their future. Sitting there in the driver's seat, staring at that date, I felt my chest tighten, like someone had just pushed my head underwater. I don't know what possessed me, but instead of starting the engine like a normal person, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and typed the address from the ticket into Google Maps. My heart was already thudding in that slow, heavy way, the kind that feels like a warning. When the map finally loaded, I blinked twice, thinking I was reading it wrong. It wasn't his office. It wasn't even a parking structure near his office. It was a hotel. A discreet, mid-range hotel barely 10 minutes from his building. You know aquele frio que dá no estômago, como se o chão estivesse afundando? That's exactly what I felt. My throat tightened, and for a second, I honestly thought I was going to throw up right there in our driveway. I leaned back against the seat, staring at the hotel name on my screen. Suddenly, every little work emergency, every late night, every weekend he claimed he had to step up for the team, it all started swirling in my mind like some sick montage I never asked to watch. I even remembered how, on that exact holiday, he'd kissed the top of my head before leaving and told me I was too sensitive lately, that I shouldn't make everything about me. Hearing those words in my memory now felt like swallowing broken glass. I kept gripping the steering wheel to ground myself, but my fingers were numb. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that maybe he'd parked there for some legitimate reason, traffic, a work event, maybe even grabbing lunch with a colleague. I tried to convince myself so hard that I almost laughed out loud at how desperate I sounded. But the longer I stared at that hotel address, the more something inside me whispered the one truth I'd been too scared to think. Men don't lie about working on holidays to eat lunch near a hotel. And just like that, the decision made itself. I turned the car on, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and drove toward the address. My hands were trembling on the wheel, but I needed to know, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. The closer I got to the hotel, the heavier the air felt inside the car, like the windows were slowly rolling up on their own. Traffic lights blurred, and I couldn't tell if it was my eyes or the sun reflecting off the windshield, but everything looked a little distorted, like the world was shifting just enough to warn me I was about to see something I couldn't unsee. When I finally turned onto the hotel street, the building appeared exactly as I imagined. Neutral, discreet, with that beige color that almost looks like it's trying not to be noticed. A place designed for secrecy. A place people choose when they don't want to be remembered. I parked a little farther away, half afraid someone would recognize the car, half ashamed that I was already thinking like that, as if I were the one doing something wrong. I sat there for a moment, engine off, staring at the entrance where men in office clothes walked in and out casually, some alone, some with women trying too hard to look relaxed. And it hit me like a punch in the ribs. This was routine for them. Normal. Expected. The thought made my skin crawl. I breathed deeply, wiped the sweat from my palms against my jeans, and forced myself to open the door. The air outside felt colder than it should have been. Walking into that lobby felt like stepping underwater. Everything was too quiet, too polished. The faint scent of vanilla air freshener mixed with something floral made my stomach twist even more. Behind the counter, the receptionist smiled politely, the kind of smile meant for strangers you'll never see again. I hesitated, suddenly aware that my voice might crack, but I swallowed hard and approached the desk. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, or what I even hoped to hear, but there I was. A wife holding a parking ticket like a loaded gun, trying not to shake as I asked the first question that would pull the thread unraveling my entire life. The receptionist's smile faltered the moment I opened my mouth. I could hear my own voice trembling as I asked whether the hotel had a parking lot, and if customers usually left tickets inside the rooms or cars. It was a stupid, roundabout question, but it was all I could manage without collapsing right there on the tiles. She nodded slowly, like she'd heard the question 1,000 times before, and said, "Yes, ma'am. Most guests keep their tickets in the car." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the door, then back to me, as if she instantly understood what I was really asking. My heart started pounding against my ribs like it was trying to break out. I took a breath so shaky it made my shoulders jerk. I held up the ticket between my fingers, trying to keep my hand steady. "This was in my husband's car," I said, my voice too soft, too controlled, the kind of control a person only has when they're one word away from falling apart. The receptionist's expression shifted. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even pity. It was recognition. Like she'd seen this scene before, too many times to pretend otherwise. She pressed her lips together in a thin line, and her eyes softened in that sad, resigned way that made my stomach drop lower. I could tell she wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if she should. So I pushed, because I had to. "He said he was working that day," I added, each word landing heavier than the last. "An urgent project, no time to come home." For a brief second, she glanced around the lobby, checking if anyone else was listening, before leaning forward just a little. Her voice dropped. "A lot of men from the offices around here come on holidays," she said quietly, carefully. "For company." The word hung in the air like smoke, settling into my lungs. And just like that, the floor tilted beneath me, and I felt the first real crack slice through my chest. I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of the counter, the cold marble grounding me just enough to keep standing. "Company?" she'd said, gently, like handling a fragile object. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Do these men come here often?" The question barely made it out, but the receptionist understood exactly what I meant. She took a slow breath, eyes darting to the screen in front of her, as if the truth might jump out on its own. "Yes," she murmured. "Some of them. Regularly." Her tone said the rest. This wasn't unusual, not here. Not with the offices full of men who wore wedding rings like props. I felt a mix of nausea and heat spread through my body, like betrayal had a temperature. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything. Not the lobby music, not the clicking of heels from someone passing behind me. Just my heartbeat echoing painfully in my ears. I forced myself to breathe, to stay upright, because I knew I wasn't done. I wasn't leaving with half-truths. "Could you—" I paused, steadying my voice. "Could you check if my husband has ever stayed here?" The words tasted metallic, bitter, but I said them anyway, because I needed the truth more than I needed dignity. The receptionist froze for a split second, just long enough to confirm she already suspected the answer. She hesitated, tapping her fingers on the desk as if debating whether to cross a line. Then, with a tiny sigh, she turned the monitor slightly away from view and typed his name. I watched her face, not the screen. Her expression told the whole story before she even spoke. That little tightening around the eyes, the slow exhale through her nose, the way her shoulders slumped just a fraction. When she finally met my gaze again, her voice was almost a whisper. "He's a frequent guest." Every syllable hit me like a blow. Frequent. Guest. My legs nearly gave out. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles whitened. The lobby suddenly felt too bright, too clean, too painfully silent, like the world was politely watching me fall apart. Frequent guest. Those two words echoed inside my skull, knocking down every excuse I'd ever built for him. All those nights he said he was exhausted from carrying the team. All those holidays he claimed he couldn't miss critical deadlines. All the times he made me feel needy for wanting his presence. They all twisted into the same ugly truth. He wasn't working. He wasn't stressed. He wasn't sacrificing for our future. He was here, with someone who wasn't me. I managed to find my voice, though it came out thin and brittle. How long? The receptionist hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek, torn between compassion and professionalism. She didn't give me dates, didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Then, almost as if guilt pushed her forward, she lowered her voice even more. I've seen him here. She paused, eyes flicking away, many times. The final confirmation felt like someone had reached into my chest and twisted. My knees buckled slightly, and I had to step back to steady myself. I could feel the sting of tears pressing at the corners of my eyes, but somehow, God knows how, I didn't cry. I thanked her with a whisper, because what else could I do? She gave me a look I'll never forget, a look filled with sympathy, regret, and that familiar resignation of women who've witnessed too many wives learn the same awful truth. I walked out of the hotel on shaky legs, the sliding doors opening with a soft whoosh that sounded almost cruelly gentle. The cold air outside hit my face, sobering me. I stared at the parking lot, gripping the ticket in my hand so tightly it tore. And standing there, heart pounding, throat burning, I knew something had shifted inside me, something deep, sharp, and irreversible. When I got home, I didn't even remember the drive back. It felt like my body had been operating on autopilot while my mind replayed every lie he'd ever told me. I walked straight into the kitchen, dropped my bag on the floor, and slid down into a chair before my legs gave out completely. The house felt different. Too quiet, too heavy, like it somehow already knew. I placed the torn parking ticket on the table and just stared at it. That stupid little slip of paper was shaking my entire marriage more violently than any fight we'd ever had. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to breathe through the ache in my chest, but all I saw were the hotel doors opening for him again and again. Memories started flooding me without mercy. All the times he made me feel guilty for questioning his long hours. The way he'd insisted I was too suspicious when I asked why he worked every single holiday. How he'd sighed and told me he couldn't afford distractions if I ever suggested spending more time together. I remembered one night especially, when he came home late, smelling faintly of floral perfume. He had laughed, saying a coworker hugged him goodbye. I had believed him. God, I had believed everything. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how easily he'd trained me to doubt myself instead of him. As I sat there, I felt the grief shift into something sharper, something steadier. I opened my laptop with trembling hands and started digging. Old receipts, half-hidden emails, work chat notifications he never bothered to delete, transactions that didn't make sense. Piece by piece, the pattern became painfully clear. He hadn't slipped. He hadn't made a one-time mistake. This was routine, calculated, familiar. I scrolled through months of evidence, each new detail slicing deeper, until my heartbreak began hardening into a cold, terrifying clarity. He had built an entire double life, and he'd built it on my trust. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, jolting me out of the fog. I walked to the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the window's reflection. My eyes looked hollow, but beneath the emptiness there was something else, something rising slowly, like a tide. Rage, not the loud, explosive kind. No, this was quiet, focused, almost surgical. The kind that comes from finally seeing the truth without the blindfold you didn't even know you were wearing. I grabbed a towel and dried my face, my breaths becoming steadier. I wasn't going to let him twist reality again. Not this time. I went back to the table and opened his work calendar, something I rarely checked because he always made it seem like rocket science I wouldn't understand. And there it was. Meetings doubled up with hours that didn't match his claims, task reports submitted suspiciously early, gaps where he'd sworn he was too busy to even text me back. The more I compared the evidence with the hotel's date, the clearer the picture became. He hadn't just lied to me. He had used his job as a shield, knowing how much pride he took in it. How he always bragged about being the reliable one, the face of the team, the future of the company. The irony made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The moment everything clicked. His career. That was his altar, his obsession, his identity. He had sacrificed our marriage to protect that image, to maintain that facade. He believed he was untouchable because he thought I'd never dare question anything tied to his precious job. And that's when the shift inside me solidified. If he used his career to hurt me, I would use his career to end him. Not out of pettiness, not out of revenge for revenge's sake, but because it was the only language he truly valued, the only thing he never imagined I would dare touch. I closed the laptop and let my hands rest on top of it, feeling the metal warm beneath my palms. For the first time since leaving that hotel, I wasn't shaking. My breath came in steady waves, not because the pain had lessened, but because I finally understood it. Betrayal wasn't just something he did to me, it was a system he'd built, a comfortable little ecosystem where he lied, cheated, and walked through life assuming I'd never question him. That realization didn't break me. It sharpened me, like a blade being pulled slowly across stone. I stood up and paced through the house, absorbing every detail. The photos on the wall, the suit he'd left draped carelessly over a chair, the shoes by the door. All props in a life he pretended was real. Something inside me hardened further when I spotted his briefcase leaning against the hallway console. I remembered how he always said his job was all he had worked for, how he constantly lectured me about being more supportive, more understanding, more patient. I knelt down, opened the briefcase, and sifted through the neatly organized folders. Performance charts, client reports, printouts of company policies he was proud of quoting in arguments. The hypocrisy made my chest tighten. He had used those policies to shame others, to mock colleagues who slipped up, to brag about being better than the rest. And yet here he was, cheating on company time, using the office name as camouflage. A double life funded by lies. I placed everything back exactly as it was, closed the latch, and straightened up slowly. My decision wasn't born out of impulse. It wasn't dramatic or chaotic. It was quiet, precise, a decision shaped by every bruise his words had left on my confidence over the years. He had chosen his career over me, over honesty, over the life we built. But he never imagined that this time, I would choose myself. And choosing myself meant one thing. He was going to feel the collapse of the world he valued most, not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through the exact crack he thought was invisible, the one he never thought I would find. That night, I sat at the dining table long after the sun went down, the room lit only by the soft glow of the overhead lamp. I opened his company's website, navigating through pages I had never bothered to look at before. Ethics code, disciplinary regulations, conduct expectations, confidentiality clauses. The language was formal, strict, almost clinical. But beneath every line, I saw an opportunity, a mirror reflecting exactly where he had crossed boundaries he once bragged about upholding. The company wasn't just conservative, it was obsessed with reputation, with public image, with moral alignment. A man caught in a scandal like his wouldn't just be reprimanded, he would be erased. The more I read, the more surreal it felt. There were entire sections dedicated to the misuse of company hours, representing the brand negatively, and extracurricular behavior that compromised corporate integrity. He had broken every rule with the same arrogance he used to lecture me about professionalism. I took detailed notes, matching their regulations to the evidence I had collected. Each line I wrote steadied me. This wasn't wild anger or revenge mania. It was strategy. He had taught me to believe he was smarter, more capable, more valuable. But here I was, connecting the dots with clearer precision than he ever imagined I possessed. Then I turned to the hotel evidence, the pictures I'd discreetly taken of the receptionist's screen when she looked away for a moment, the address on the parking ticket, the timestamps from his messages claiming he was buried in work. Everything aligned too perfectly. I even checked his phone records, comparing the hours he texted me from the office to the hours he was actually at the hotel. My stomach tightened, but not from pain anymore, from clarity. If he wanted to build his life around his career, then his career would be the exact foundation I'd pull out from under him. The next morning, I woke up with that strange, focused calm that only comes after a night of making a decision you can't walk back from. I made myself coffee, hands steady for the first time in days, and sat by the kitchen window as if it were just another morning. But I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that hotel lobby. I wasn't the same woman who used to shrink whenever he spoke in that condescending, "you don't get how my world works" tone. As the steam from the mug curled toward my face, I opened my laptop again and began building the file, the one that would become his undoing. I titled it something plain, something harmless: documentation. It made me smile. I organized everything meticulously: dates, screenshots, receipts, GPS location from the hotel's parking log, his messages claiming to be in back-to-back meetings, even his work calendar inconsistencies. I aligned each piece like a puzzle, careful, methodical, almost detached, as if I were analyzing someone else's life, not the ruins of my marriage. And the more I organized, the angrier I became at how sloppy he had been. How confident. How sure I'd never question anything tied to his job. He always said his reputation was the backbone of everything. So I highlighted each corporate rule he had violated, attaching the evidence beneath it. By the time I finished, the file looked like something a legal team would prepare. Thorough, ironic, devastating. Still, I didn't rush. This wasn't about vengeance thrown blindly. It was about precision, making sure his downfall was undeniable even to him. I researched anonymous reporting options, whistleblower procedures, and internal complaint protocols. The company took misconduct very seriously, especially when it involved executives. Every step I uncovered only reinforced how brilliantly karma had positioned itself for me. All I had to do was hand them the truth. His truth. The truth he never thought I would see. And the best part? He would never suspect I was the one holding the knife until it was already twisted. By the end of the week, I had everything ready. Not just the evidence, but the timing, the delivery, the exact moment his world would crack. I waited deliberately, watching him move around the house with that same self-assured arrogance, completely unaware that every step he took was inching him closer to the cliff he'd built himself. He talked nonstop about a major presentation coming up, how the senior board was finally going to see his real worth, how this could be the step that changed everything. I listened quietly, nodding when necessary, studying the man who had no idea his downfall was already printed, organized, indexed, and saved on a USB drive in my purse. He kept bragging all week about the clients he was going to impress, the promotions he expected, how he'd be untouchable after this meeting. The irony didn't sting anymore. It amused me, almost gently. I'd watch him tie his tie in the mirror, smoothing his hair, telling me how supportive wives make all the difference. And every time he said something like that, something inside me clicked a little more firmly into place. He really believed he was invincible. He believed I was predictable, fragile, manageable. I think that was the part that made the plan feel almost poetic. He couldn't fall from a place he wasn't already standing on. But he was high. So high. The night before his big presentation, I sat on the bed folding laundry when my phone buzzed with the automated reminder I had set. Tomorrow, 9:30 a.m., deliver file. I stared at the screen, my breath steady, my heartbeat calm. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't second-guessing. I felt aligned. Like I had finally stepped into the version of myself he never believed existed. A version that didn't beg for honesty or cling to crumbs of affection. A woman who saw clearly. A woman who finally understood that revenge wasn't about screaming or crying or saying the perfect cutting line. Sometimes revenge was simply letting the truth walk right up to a man who spent years pretending it didn't exist, and watching it level everything he thought he controlled. The morning of his big presentation, he woke up actually humming, as he shaved. He looked lighter, almost euphoric, pacing around the bedroom while rehearsing lines under his breath. I watched him button his shirt with that smug, satisfied confidence he wore like a second skin. He told me, almost proudly, that today was the day the company finally realized who they were dealing with. I nodded, hiding the quiet storm brewing under my calm exterior. If only he knew how true that statement really was. He thought he owned the narrative. He thought he owned me. But the moment he stepped out of that bathroom, the balance had already shifted. We left the house at the same time, him heading toward his car and me toward mine. He didn't even notice how tightly I held my purse, or how I paused by the door to look at him one last time as the man he believed himself to be. He kissed my cheek in a hurry, barely even looking at me, and said something about celebrating tonight. I forced a faint smile, because pretending had become second nature after everything he put me through. As soon as he backed out of the driveway, I locked the door behind me, took a deep breath, and felt something inside me settle, like destiny clicking into place. Driving to his office felt strangely peaceful. The sky was clear, the city felt awake, and I was shockingly steady. When I parked and stepped out of the car, my heels clicked against the pavement with a confidence I didn't recognize but instantly embraced. The building's glass facade reflected the morning sun, almost blinding, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction at the symbolism: transparency, honesty, truth. I walked through the revolving doors without hesitation, the USB drive in my bag feeling heavier with purpose. Today wasn't about confronting him. It wasn't about pleading or screaming or asking why. Today was about giving the truth exactly where it needed to go. The receptionist at his company greeted me with that polished corporate smile, unaware of what I was carrying. I told her I had documents for the senior VP and HR director, and she immediately picked up the phone to announce my arrival. There was no hesitation in my voice, no tremor in my hands, just an eerie calm that felt almost protective, like a shield I had grown overnight. Within minutes, an assistant escorted me through a hallway lined with awards, framed mission statements, and glossy photos of smiling employees. I'd walked these halls before, years ago, but today the air felt different. Charged. Ready. They led me into a small conference room, one of those neutral, glass-walled spaces that make you feel both observed and isolated. The HR director entered first, followed by the senior VP, a sharp, intimidating woman who looked like she could spot a lie from a mile away. Perfect. They shook my hand politely, sat across from me, and waited. I reached into my purse, pulled out the neatly organized folder, and placed it on the table. "This concerns one of your executives," I said, my voice steady, almost detached. I felt it was my responsibility to bring it directly to you. The HR director's expression shifted immediately, curiosity sharpened into concern. I watched their eyes move from the parking ticket to the hotel photos, to the screenshots, to the timestamps, to the cross-referenced company regulations. The VP's jaw tightened as she flipped through each page. She didn't rush. She didn't skim. She absorbed every detail like someone assembling a puzzle she already suspected was missing pieces. When she reached the section about him using company hours for personal affairs at a hotel, something in her posture snapped into place, a shift from professional interest to decisive authority. Finally, she closed the folder, placed her hand on top of it, and met my eyes with a clarity that made my breath catch. She didn't need to say a word. I knew what came next. It didn't take long. Maybe 10 minutes after I handed them the folder, the VP asked me to wait outside the conference room while they handled the matter immediately. Her tone was clipped, decisive, the kind of voice that ends careers. I stepped into the hallway, my heartbeat oddly steady, and stood near the glass wall that overlooked the lobby. From where I stood, I could see the elevators. I could see the moment they called him. And I could see, through the frosted glass of another conference room, the start of a scene I had imagined 100 times, but never truly believed I'd witness. He arrived looking confused at first, then annoyed, the same expression he wore whenever something interrupted his grand plans. He walked in, adjusting his tie, clearly assuming it was a last-minute prep session for his presentation. Then the door closed behind him. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw everything. The VP sliding the folder across the table, his face going pale, his posture collapsing almost instantly. His mouth moved fast. Explanations, excuses, desperation, but it didn't matter. He pointed toward the hallway, toward where I stood, as if blaming me would save him. His expression twisted from shock to disbelief, like he genuinely couldn't fathom that the woman he'd lied to so easily was capable of exposing him. Minutes later, security arrived. I watched him stand, watched his jaw tighten as the VP gestured toward the door, firm, final. He tried to protest, shaking his head, running a hand through his hair in that frantic way of his when things slipped out of his control. But it was too late. The guards escorted him out through the lobby, and when he finally saw me, his face drained completely. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said all of it. How could you? And for the first time, I felt nothing but calm. Because the truth was simple. I didn't destroy anything. I just revealed what he'd been doing in the dark,